The Legend of the Christmas Rose by Selma Lagerlöf. Robber Mother lived in Robber's Cave, together with Robber Father and all their children in the Göinge forest in southern Skåne. They lived in the forest because, well, Robber Father was a robber and an outlaw, and so Robber Mother had to sometimes, if it had happened that Robber Father had a few weeks of bad luck with his hunt, well, then she had to take on the road and beg. Robber Mother and her brood were worse than a pack of wolves, and if ever it happened that she wasn't satisfied, there was a high risk that she would return and set fire to the house, or if anyone so much as thought of harming her, they knew very well that Robber Father would find a way and seek revenge. So no one really dared refuse Mother Robber, and generally people gave her whatever she demanded. One day, as she had gone from house to house and begged, she came to Övid, which at the time was a cloister. She rang the bell and asked for food. Whilst waiting quietly at the gate, the youngsters were running about, when one of them came over and pulled at her skirt as a signal that he had discovered something he wanted Robber Mother to come and see. The entire cloister was surrounded by a high and strong wall, but a little back gate stood ajar. Robber Mother pushed the gate open and walked inside without asking leave, as it was her custom to do. Övid Cloister was managed at the time by Abbot Hans, who knew all about herbs. Within the cloister he had made a little herb garden, and it was into this that Robber Mother had forced her way. At first glance she was so astonished. It was high summertide, and the garden was so full of flowers, blues, reds, and yellows. A lay brother walked about in the garden pulling up weeds. It was he who had left the door in the wall open to throw the weeds outside on the rubbish heap. As soon as he saw Robber Mother with all 5 youngsters in tow, he ran toward her and ordered them away. But Robber Mother walked right on and took no notice of the lay brother. He thought she might not have understood him and walked to take her by the arm and turn her toward the gate. "I am Robber Mother from Göinge forest, so touch me if you dare." It was obvious she wanted to be left in peace, as if she had announced she was the Queen of Denmark. "You must know, Robber Mother, that this is a monk's cloister, and no woman in the land is allowed within these walls. If you do not go away, the monks will be angry with me because I forgot to close the gate, and perhaps they will drive me away from the cloister and the herb garden." Such prayers were wasted on Robber Mother. She walked straight ahead among the flower beds and looked at the hyssop with its magenta blossoms and at the honeysuckles, which were full of deep orange-coloured flower clusters. The lay brother knew of no other remedy than to run into the cloister and call for help. He returned with 2 monks, and Robber Mother saw that now it meant business. With feet firmly planted, she stood in the path and began shrieking all the awful vengeance she would put on the cloister if she couldn't remain in the herb garden as long as she wished. The monks did not see why they need fear her and thought only of driving her out. So Robber Mother let out the perfect volley of shrieks and, throwing herself upon the monks, clawed and bit at them. Well, the men soon learnt that she could overpower them, and all they could do was go back to the cloister for reinforcements. As they were running through the passageway, they met Abbot Hans. They told him what all the noise was about, and that they were unable to drive her out, and they were going to call for assistance. Abbot Hans told them not to use force. There really was no need to call for help, and then he went out there on his own, with only one lay brother at his side. When he came into the garden, he watched Robber Mother with astonishment. She was wandering among the flower beds. He was quite sure she had never been in a herb garden before. Each plant with its own species of rare flowers, and yet she looked at them as if they were old acquaintances. At some she smiled, at others she shook her head. Wild and terrible as the Robber Mother looked, he couldn't help liking that she had fought with 3 monks for the privilege of viewing the garden in peace. He came up to her and asked in a mild tone if the garden pleased her. Robber Mother turned defiantly toward Abbot Hans, expecting to be trapped or overpowered. But when she noticed how fragile he was, she said, I thought I'd never seen a prettier garden, but then I understood it cannot be compared with the one I know of. This was not exactly what Abbot Hans had expected to hear, that Robber Mother had seen a garden more beautiful than his. "This is Abbot Hans," the lay brother said. "He has gathered the flowers from far and near with utmost care. We all know that there is not a more beautiful garden to be found in all of Skåne, and it is not befitting that you, who live in the forest all year round, should find fault with his work." "I don't wish to make myself the judge of either him or you. I'm only saying that if you could see the garden of which I am thinking, you would uproot all the flowers you have planted here and cast them away like weeds," said Robber Mother. "I understand you're only saying so to tease us," laughed the lay brother. "Of course you must have a very pretty garden amongst the pines in Göinge forest." Robber Mother grew crimson with rage to think that her words were doubted. "It may be true that until today I've never been within the walls of a real herb garden, but you monks, you who are holy men, certainly must know that on Christmas Eve the great Göinge forest is transformed into a beautiful garden to commemorate the hour of our Lord's birth. We who live in the forest have seen this happen every year, and in that garden I have seen flowers so lovely that I dared not lift my hand to pluck 'em." The lay brother was just about to continue the argument when Abbot Hans gave him the sign to be silent. For ever since his childhood, he had heard it said that on Christmas Eve the forest was dressed in holiday glory. He had never had the good fortune to see it. He therefore begged Robber Mother that he might come up to the robber's cave on Christmas Eve. He would not betray them. On the contrary, he would reward them in so far as it lay in his power. At first, Robber Mother said no, and at the same time the desire to prove to the monk that the garden which she knew was more beautiful than his got the better of her, and she gave in. "You may only bring one person to accompany you, and you're not to trap us as sure as you are a holy man." Abbot Hans promised, and then Robber Mother went her way. It happened that Archbishop Absalon from Lund came to Ovid, and Abbot Hans was showing him the herb garden, and that got him thinking of Robber Mother's visit. So he started telling the bishop about Robber Father, who these many years had lived as an outlaw in the forest, and asked him if it wouldn't be a good idea to get a letter of ransom for the man, that he might lead an honest life among respectable folk. As things are now, his children are growing up into worse malefactors than himself, and, well, there'll soon be a whole gang of robbers to deal with up there in the forest. Oh no, the archbishop did not want to let the robber loose amongst honest folk in the villages. It would be best for all that he remain in the forest. Abbot Hans then told the bishop about Göinge forest, which every year at Christmas was said to clothe itself in summer bloom around the robber's cave. If these bandits are not so bad that God's glories can be made manifest to them, surely we cannot be too wicked to experience the same blessing. The archbishop answered, "This much I will promise you, though. The day you send me a blossom from the garden in Göinge forest, I will give you letters of ransom for all the outlaws you may choose to plead for." Abbot Hans thanked Absalon for his good promise and said he was quite sure he would be able to send him the flower. And so, the following Christmas Eve, Abbot Hans made his way to Göinge forest, led by one of Robber Mother's wild youngsters. Abbot Hans had been longing to make this journey. It was quite different matter for the lay brother who accompanied him. He thought the whole thing a snare, which Robber Mother had laid for Abbot Hans, that he might fall into her husband's clutches. Whilst riding towards the forest, they saw that everywhere they were preparing to celebrate Christmas, and with each Christmas preparation, Abbot Hans's haste increased, for he was thinking of the festivities that awaited him. The lay brother whined and fretted and grew more and more anxious, and begged and implored Abbot Hans to turn back and not throw himself deliberately into the robber's hands. Abbot Hans carried on, paying no heed to the lay brother's lamentations. It turned out to be a long and hazardous ride through the forest. The farther they rode, the colder it grew, and now snow covered the grounds. They climbed steep and slippery side paths, crawled swamp and marsh, and pushed through windfall and bramble. Just as daylight was waning, the robber boy guided them across a forest meadow skirted by tall green fir trees. At the end of the meadow loomed a mountain wall, and in this wall they saw a door of thick boards, which the boy opened and showed them into a poor mountain grotto with bare stone walls. Robber Mother was seated before a log fire that burned in the middle of the floor. Alongside the walls were beds of virgin pine and moss. On one of them lay Robber Father asleep. "Come in out there," shouted Robber Mother without rising. "And better bring in the horses so they won't be destroyed by the night cold." Abbot Hans walked boldly into the cave, and the lay brother followed. What wretchedness and poverty! And nothing was done to celebrate Christmas here. Robber Mother had neither brewed nor baked, neither washed nor scoured. "Sit down by the fire and warm yourself, and if you have food with you, eat, for the food which we in the forest prepare you wouldn't care to taste. And if you're tired after the long journey, you can lie down on one of these beds. You needn't be afraid of oversleeping, for I'm sitting here by the fire keeping watch. I shall awaken you in time to see that which you have come up here to see." Abbot Hans did what Robber Mother had said, but he was so tired that he was hardly able to eat, and as soon as he could stretch himself on the bed, he fell asleep. The lay brother thought he'd better keep an eye on Robber Father, but gradually fatigue got the better of him too, and he dropped into a doze. When he woke up, he saw